The Civil War started in 1861, but it was brewing long before then. As the Mexican-American War wrapped up in 1848, new states were coming in as free states, setting the stage for arguments over states' rights and slave rights. As the territory of California was to become a state, it came with a request to be admitted to the Union with a constitution prohibiting slavery. Henry Clay tried pushing a compromise, but President Taylor wasn't having it, stating he would be willing to use force to keep states in compliance. Later that year, Taylor died of cholera. As President Fillmore assumed office, he signed the Fugitive Slave Act and supported Clay's Compromise of 1850, helping it get approved by Congress, which alienated people in North and South. In 1851, the first installment of Uncle Tom's Cabin was written, which was an anti-slavery novel written by Harriet Beecher Stowe. It was fully published in 1852, which helped raise even more tension on slavery. 1854 tensions hit their highest as a guerrilla war between pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers broke out, which was a statewide civil war known as Bleeding Kansas. By 1855, anti-slavery settlers formed an army called the Free State Forces, writing the Topeka Constitution, which created a second government in Kansas. As tensions grew, the first instance of violence was marked as the Wakarusa War later that year. But a truce was met shortly after Free State forces drove outsiders away. It didn't last long as pro-slavery forces invaded Lawrence, Kansas the following spring. Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts gave an anti-slavery speech on the Senate floor and was immediately attacked with a cane by Representative Preston Brooks of South Carolina, which became known as the Sumner-Brooks Affair. Days later, some Free State forces, led by John Brown, conducted what became known as the Pottawatomie Massacre, where they murdered 5 unarmed pro-slavery settlers along the Pottawatomie Creek. As Bleeding Kansas continued to rage on, hundreds were killed and a lot of homes were burnt down. President Buchanan took over. In 1857, and a state disunion convention was held in Massachusetts to peacefully separate the North and the South. The Supreme Court ruled the Dred Scott decision, which was a slave living in a free state suing for his freedom. He and his owner were returned to their state as the Supreme Court did not recognize slaves as U.S. citizens, pushing the country closer to civil war. As Kansas elected free state legislature, pro-slavery advocates tried bringing Kansas into the Union as a slave state with their own Lecompton Constitution. The Lecompton Constitution was defeated in Kansas, so the House voted to resubmit to a national vote in order to accept Kansas as a state under that constitution, but it was defeated easily again in early 1858. Southern slave owners tried bringing back the African slave trade in 1859 to keep up with the North on population and economic development. Bleeding Kansas ended with Kansas being ratified as an anti-slavery state, further triggering the divide. John Brown led a raid into Harper's Ferry, Virginia, in an effort to establish anti-slavery, but they were caught and hung for treason to the state. This divided the North and South even more. In 1860, Lincoln rose up as a strong Republican candidate with his Cooper Union address, referring to his party as more aligned with the Founding Fathers, as government should control slavery territories, and while leaving slave states alone, new states should come in as free states. As Lincoln won presidency, Senator John Crittenden of Kentucky created the Crittenden Compromise on the Senate floor in hopes to obstruct secession. As Buchanan gave his farewell speech and Lincoln came in, states started the process of seceding, with South Carolina being the first. In 1861, Kansas was admitted to the Union as a free state, while Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas all seceded from the Union. As the Confederacy was formed, Jefferson Davis was elected president with Montgomery, Alabama, becoming the capital of the Confederacy, and the Stars and Bars flag was created. As Lincoln was sworn in early 1861, nobody knew he was about to lead the United States through its bloodiest and greatest moral, constitutional, and political crisis. Davis wanted Fort Sumter surrendered to the Confederacy since it was in South Carolina, but negotiations failed, and he ordered General Beauregard to open fire on Federal arsenal. In retaliation, Lincoln called for 70,000 volunteers to join the U.S. Army as militiamen to fight the rebellion. This drove Virginia to secede from the Union. As Lincoln ordered blockades on Confederate ports to disrupt their importation of supplies, Arkansas seceded from the Union. The House of Representatives passed the Morrill Tariff Act to help pay for the war. North Carolina and Tennessee seceded from the Union as the capital of the Confederacy moved to Richmond, Virginia. The Battle of Bull Run took place in Manassas, Virginia, where Confederate General Beauregard and General Thomas Stonewall Jackson defeated the Union forces under General McDowell. McDowell was relieved of his duties and replaced by General McClellan afterwards. That battle saw almost 5,000 casualties, with over 800 killed and the rest being wounded, missing, or captured. During the Battle of Bull Run, it was noted the Stars and Bars Confederate flag resembled the Union flag during battle, so they created a new battle flag, which is what most people recognize today as the Confederate flag. In March of 1862, a naval engagement erupted in Virginia as the Battle of Monitor and Merrimack, opposing gunships which drew to a standoff. Eventually, the Union established naval superiority and got the Confederacy to abandon Norfolk. The Battle of Shiloh in Tennessee was the second great engagement of the Civil War, as General Grant led the Union and had taken Fort Henry and Fort Donelson. Each side lost around 10,000 troops in the course of 2 days. As the Union organizes its first set of black troops that were former slaves, Confederates threatened to execute those captured troops, and Lincoln responded with the same amount of executions of captured Confederates. A second Battle of Bull Run led to huge Union losses as General Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson's Confederate Army dominated the battlefield in late 1862. The second battle saw closer to 22,000 casualties, with almost 14,000 Union soldiers and just over 8,000 Confederates killed, wounded, missing, or captured. Weeks later, the Battle of Antietam took place as the bloodiest single-day battle and as the greatest Confederate threat to D.C. as they sought to detach Maryland, which was a slave state that rejected secession. As armies divided, this split into multiple battles. But in the end, McClellan's troops held them off, and Lee's troops crossed back over the Potomac River. Over 12,000 troops from both sides combined were lost that day. Some historians fault McClellan for not finishing Lee's troops off there as they severely outnumbered them. Lincoln relieved him of command because of it, and placed General Meade in his stead. After the Battle of Antietam, Lincoln used that time to issue his preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, giving the Confederacy a few months to lay down their arms, or he would free all slaves in the Confederate States. The last great battle of 1862 was in Fredericksburg, Virginia, where the Confederates regained ground, as the Union lost soldiers 2-1. The original Monitor gunship sunk off Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, but how well it held up against the Merrimack gunship, and design of it inspired many others to be made, even around the world. As the Battle of Stones River was underway going into the new year, Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation took effect. At the Battle of Chancellorsville, Stonewall Jackson was wounded by his own men, requiring his arm to be amputated, which then caused infection, and he died of pneumonia a few days after the battle. General Lee still won the battle through unique strategy, but both sides combined of almost 30,000 casualties, with around 11,000 noted as dead or missing. In the heart of the Confederacy, food deprivation caused the Richmond Bread Riot, which saw President Davis threaten his people with troops firing on the crowd. As General Lee attempted to invade Washington, D.C. again, his troops ran into General Meade accidentally in Gettysburg, setting the stage for the biggest engagement of the Civil War. Lee made a mistake sending 15,000 men on a suicide run of Cemetery Ridge, retreating shortly after. Meade did not pursue, frustrating Lincoln. After General Grant captured a Confederate stronghold in Vicksburg, Mississippi, Lincoln promoted him to top lieutenant general. A riot broke out bad enough in New York over the draft that Lincoln sent troops from Gettysburg there to end the fighting. Lincoln makes the Gettysburg Address over the blood-stained field and offers pardons to those in the South that come back to the Union. 1864 saw General Grant continue his Spotsylvania campaign, as his troops also hammered through Lee's forces on multiple other fields. The Battle of the Wilderness was a bloody battle that never saw a victor, but showed Grant's loyalty and persistence to keep advancing. As Lincoln opens peace talks that fail, Democrats nominate General McClellan as their candidate to run against Lincoln. Following decisive victories in the Atlanta and Alabama, Lincoln was re-elected and chose Andrew Johnson as his vice president. Johnson was known as a racist and uneducated Southerner from Tennessee, so Lincoln felt he would help balance his ticket to help continue peace talks. In 1865, the House approved the 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery, while the Confederate Congress gave General Lee full command of the Confederate Army. After the Confederate Congress approved recruitment of slaves for military involvement, President Davis declared all volunteers and their families would be given freedom. April of 1865. General Grant took over Petersburg and the Confederate capital Richmond, causing Confederate leaders to retreat further south. As they captured the much-needed supplies at the Battle of Appomattox, it prompted General Lee to surrender to Grant, marking the end of the Civil War on April 9th. On April 14th, President Lincoln was shot in the head at Ford's Theater by Confederate sympathizer John Wilkes Booth. He died the following morning. John Wilkes Booth was captured and killed almost 2 weeks later. As word got out about Lee's surrender, Confederate troops continued surrendering across the South. A reward was placed on Jefferson Davis's capture, which occurred just over a week later in Georgia. Lincoln was laid to rest, and almost 2 months later, 8 assassination conspirators were convicted and executed. Once the 13th Amendment was ratified later that year, slavery was abolished across America. Jefferson Davis was imprisoned for 2 years before given bail, but President Johnson pardoned all ex-Confederates to get past the deadliest war on American soil. The American Civil War lost around 700,000 troops due to combat and illness in that 4-year span.